So, welcome to Artist-Curator Conversation about the Dissolving Histories and Unreliable Presence exhibition, currently still on in the gallery, but just unfortunately not open, but it will be soon. So we have with us today Mary Cremin, we have Hanna, we have Liliane Puthod, and Mary Stevens. And is Stuart maybe going to join us?
Hopefully, I'm not sure.
Very nice.
And this is the first time for us trying to do this, so let's see how it works out. Okay, so where are we going to start?
Well, maybe we could talk about how the exhibition came about, or the history of the series of exhibitions that you've been doing, and where that kind of stemmed from.
Okay, cool. So the Dissolving History series really came out of us kind of completing our collective history series. The collective history series was looking back at things that should or could be representative of our recent history. And the Dissolving Histories was set up to look at, if we're going to be doing that again in 20 years' time, what is it will we be looking at? Which artists will we be looking at? So it's kind of preempting a history, really. It's kind of looking at who's making work now that we'll be wanting to talk about later. And this is the third installment of the series. And each time we get to work with a guest curator, and really privileged this time to work with Mary.
Thanks, Peter. Good to work with you all. I guess, yeah, so when Peter invited me to do this, we were looking at both artists from the north and south. So I don't know if that's typical of Dissolving Histories, or looking at the island as a whole.
Well, I think that's a recent kind of shift. I know with Paul Searight in the previous installment, he wanted to know if this was possible, and it kind of gone, well, we haven't really set up any rules, really. So if you think they're relevant to what's going on at this, at this moment in time, and they're going to help us understand of how we got to where we are in the future, then let's work with them.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's quite prescient, the artists that are showing there at the moment, especially like with everyone's talking about different ideologies as well. Like, so Michael is looking at kind of utopian societies. Liliane was looking at consumerism and material culture. Bassam was looking at more surreal landscapes, and then Stuart was looking at mythological. So I think, especially where we are now in this very surreal moment, that the works have a prescience to what's kind of happening now. And I don't know, maybe one of you guys, Michael or Liliane, want to kind of talk about that, or how you see your work within the current situation.
Well, I guess that, like, if you speak of the times of now, it's really, really strange times. More in relation to Dissolving Histories, I guess there was, for me, something that was new to work within that, the Golden Thread gallery space, which kind of like happened at my first visit of the space, when I could see like it was really industrial and would call like certain choices of materials. I guess he was like following up also on a research into like modes of displays and kind of like post-industrial aesthetics, and the way like there's like modes of communication that I could reappropriate and reinvest in my work through sculptures and installations. So I guess it became more site specific as we worked along, and also like through the discussion with the artist and yourself. So yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing, when I look at the images now, it all seems very apocalyptic. I don't know if that's...
It is, yeah, completely.
I don't know if that's just how it seems now, or it always had that kind of feel about it. But the sort of the whole process felt quite intuitive when the exhibition was being put together. I mean, it felt like there was sort of an openness and trust in the artist, which was really good. we had sort of met up for a couple of discussions, I think, where we talked about how it was coming together, and yeah, hearing from the other artists who, like, I didn't know in depth about their work, so just hearing about them, and yeah, it felt like it all came together quite intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
It was really nice, those conversations, how open everybody was for work not only to represent what they're doing now, but also to flow through each other. And I think that was really where the planning began, really. You know, it's kind of like we talked about everyone's particular interests, what they were doing, and then got into, well, how does this take shape? And the work that stand alone, have their own narrative opportunity, but flow through this other. And the post-apocalyptic, you know, looking outside now, which I am, it doesn't look like the apocalypse I thought it might. And the exhibition probably looks more so. Though a couple of weeks ago, I thought it looked quite like time travel through some 80s nightclub into a dark alley and back out the other side into some surveillance room. You know, it was it's amazing how it's changed given the change in circumstance.
Yeah, but I guess, you know, all those kind of ideologies as well, especially with Michael's work and those kind of utopian notions, they're always kind of driven by this kind of notion of the apocalypse on the other hand, isn't it? You know, trying to create this perfect society that can survive kind of moments like this as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, even the coins as we go in. But Michael, would you like to tell us more about those, really?
So they're from Utopia, like a spiritual community that I visited, and who make their own currency, and like the sort of symbolism on them are quite like interesting, and they have like a text that describes where they're coming from with it, where they talk about trying to sort of reappropriate currency into like a more cooperative and solidarity, and as a tool rather than something that you just aspire for in itself. And yeah, about the sort of one thing that I found from I visited some different utopian communities, and you do feel like they're separating themselves a bit, like Mary was saying, but also one thing that was really apparent across all of them was their relationship with the outside world, which is commercial, because they can only really be self-sufficient to some extent. So a lot of them are based around a particular, you know, export. So Port Sunlight in Liverpool was one of them, and that's the setup around the Lever Brothers soap factory. So it was set up as this like model village to be supportive of the workers and to give them leisure time, and based on the founder's ideology. But half of the place is like a soap factory that ships soap out around the world. And there's another one that I'm hoping to visit, which is the, I don't know the pronunciation of this one, but Famille Vestiaire in France, which is set up in the ideas of Charles Fourier, and they make cast iron stoves which get exported. So they tend to often be these sort of centers of expertise of a particular thing, and then they survive through that sort of trade with the outside world. So they're all non-planet utopias are very connected, you know, to the outside world in a way.
I remember back to an old exhibition we did in the gallery, Interplanetary Revolutions, where the gallery issued its own currency to visitors on the opening night, but the currency was set up as a limited edition print, and you had to choose whether to spend the print in exchange for drinks at the cocktail bar or at the wine beer counter. And as people spent the currency was shredded, so the limited edition became greater in value because there was less of them. Playing out that kind of playing that out in that moment was really good fun. But
There were a lot of people drinking cocktails. So it must
They're
be
like,
very valuable.
let's have fun and enjoy it.
But you had to choose to drink the cocktails in isolation, which is kind because Shira had the isolation bar, so that was kind of preemptive as well. But Liliane, your work definitely talks of the material culture, and I remember going in the studio, you talking about archaeology linked to the kind of packaging and the material encasing, holding this kind of value and story.
Yeah. I guess it's like, if I speak especially about Cool Death, greetings, brackets, greetings, that is maybe where I want to combine like this archaeological find that might tell you about a certain time or about a certain way of living in the past, I guess. And
Oh, I think she's frozen.
Well, maybe this kind of speaks also of the idea of containment, this kind of archaeological moments frozen in time. I'm spurious now. Are we all frozen?
No, I think just Liliane. Maybe it's just her connection. I think it's super interesting too that all these kind of material objects as well, you know, that Liliane works around, that they're all kind of frozen in time in these stores. You know the way a lot of time people talk about how a person needs to activate a sculpture or activate these material objects. It's like all these objects are frozen in time, right? So they have to be, we activate them as such.
I disappeared.
Yeah, you disappeared. So we
we had lived.
Sorry, I disappeared time. I got like. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, we just started talking a little bit about the you know, just of the moment, how all these kind of material objects are in these stores kind of frozen, and you know, there's always this lot of discussion about how, you know, the audience activates the sculpture or activates the material objects, so that, you know, the consumer no longer exists as such, so all these things become these kind of dead objects.
Yeah, completely. Yeah,
which is kind of interesting in terms of your work as well, that a lot of that kind of around material culture and the objects and production, all of that.
Yeah, it was also like, I think the works I show in Dissolving Histories, they were works from different exhibitions that I showed before, and it was the first time that I showed them together, and it kind of like brought like a new story to it. And I guess, as you were saying at the beginning, like the working together, or like the discussion we had at the beginning about how to make that exhibition happen and what do we want from it. And I guess the flow of the people, like the visitor kind of walking through the space, and it really has a particular shape, like this kind of U shape where you come into one side and like exit on the other side. And I suppose like not a journey, but like a kind of passing through time through the space, the gallery space, and then when you reach the back, like going through the curtains, that going like through this cold room, and even more like feeling that the temperature is changed as well. So it kind of like always has this like experiential dimension to it. So yeah, I think it's like the works really are kind of displayed as well in a way that they are not just on their own. They really belong all together, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that was talked about quite early about how the space would be, and it was drawn out. And I think it was maybe Bassam who suggested maybe not to have the curtains and the carpets, which work really well in the golden thread spaces for projections. But I think having it like this, you really get the flow that Liliane is talking about through the works. Everything feels quite connected, I think. Even with those sort of, I don't know what they're called, those hanging curtains.
Yeah, like the meat locker kind of.
Like PVC strips.
So even with those, because they're transparent, I think they don't separate it in any sort of negative way, you know.
Yeah.
But they do distort it, which is what, when you look through it, it does kind of distort the image or what you're looking at. So there's kind of that kind of, there is that still that kind of blockage between seeing what's on the other side at the same time.
Yeah, and I think also the choice of having no lighting, but the light coming from the artworks maybe like goes towards this idea of maybe apocalyptical, because it's really kind of red and blue, and all these different elements of sculpture and screens are all there lying, and like having no extra walls as well in the space really kind of bring that up.
Because it really takes you into the surface, say, of Stuart's work, which these black kind of sort of matte objects standing there, reminiscent of the standing stone kind of configurations, but they just really brought to life by the bleeding through of the red of the neon and that blue light. Yeah, there's something that's very particular about how they're situated that activates the experience of them. And then that's intercut with the flickering light from Bassam's video projection.
Yeah. And then there is kind of these odd connections as well between Bassam's work and Stuart's as well, in terms of the landscape that you see in the animation. That reflects the kind of the same forms of the sculptural pieces as well. So there's this really nice correlation between the two that works really well, that really wasn't designed in that way, but it's just kind of serendipity that it kind of happened, that they kind of reflect each other in that way.
Yeah, I sort of had a slight reservation at the start when I was picking that video to show, just because it had, like, I'd shown it in Belfast before quite recently, but that was like in a solo show. So I was really, one of the things I was interested in was to have it contextualized in the new space and with the new work. And I think with that work in gallery too, I think it probably draws different things out of the work.
No, absolutely. Having got to experiencing it as the solo exhibition, and then in that space, with having made the journey through and encountering Bassam's block monitors with this repetition of that animation going through. Yeah, it's a really different way of encountering the work, and it actually felt much more sculptural in that setting. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the practical things I liked about it was that you had that distance to see it from quite far away, and you weren't just turning into it.
Yeah, because a lot of times the kind of video works exist in isolation, don't they? Because they're usually confined into a box room, and they're separated from the other work. So to combine the two together, I think works really well. And even just that, I've never minded. I quite like sound bleeds and things over on top of each other. So I think that works quite well. I mean, not all artists enjoy that type of things, but I quite like that interruption between the works. I think is quite good. Hi, Stuart.
Is that Stuart joining us?
Hey, Stuart.
Yeah.
Hi, Stuart.
I don't know he hasn't plugged in yet, is he? There you go.
We can't.
Is that us? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
How you doing?
Hi.
Hi.
Stuart, we've just been, I suppose we've spent the last 15-20 minutes talking through the show, and we've had Liliane and Michael tell us a little bit about where their work came from and how they feel it sits within the rest. So maybe with your arrival, you could do the same.
Do the same. Okay. So what do we need to know how my work
came about and how you feel it sits in the flow of the whole? Because it,
Yeah, I mean, I was really worried at the start about how it was going to work.
There seems to be this anxiety that everybody felt. Who knew?
Yeah, I had a couple of weeks of being completely panic stricken about. I was like, oh my god, what am I going to do? I don't have enough direction. And then I was just like, right, just start thinking about something and do it. And in the end, it worked quite well. I mean, I think all of the pieces they gelled in the end of it, but it took a long time for me to be settled on what I wanted to do.
And was that because of the group context, or was it because?
No, it wasn't so much the group context. I think it was because I think you guys held back from telling us what you wanted, exactly, explicitly what you wanted. So it kind of freaked me out completely. I was like, I'm not used to this. Normally, you kind of get told what's wanted from you at the start of an exhibition. Like, I want to show this, or I want to show that. And we didn't have that, so it was kind of like, you know. It was. Well, I suppose it's nice having that bit of freedom, but it was slightly terrifying at the same time, because I looking at all the other artists, and I was like thinking, oh my god, these guys are all really amazing work. I'm like, what am I going to show in this, and how am I going to fit into this?
Was your work like site specific? Like, was it a new work for that space?
It's a brand new work.
Yeah, so
because I hadn't
were in that position, whereas like maybe all of us kind of showed work that was.
I think everybody else had kind of was showing work that they had showed before, and I was kind of in the position where I hadn't made any work for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need to use this opportunity to show something new. So
yeah.
But yeah, that made things worse. Probably put more pressure on myself than I should have, you know.
Well, I mean, I guess for me and Peter, we kind of realized that, you know, we there's always budgetary constraints, and you don't really want to put the pressure on artists to make new works for group shows.
Yeah.
So I guess it was important for us that there wasn't that prerequisite that had to be done, and it kind of.
I think a lot of the previous work probably wouldn't have worked in that show, because it all required some sort of like natural light and things, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So well, there was maybe a couple of pieces that would have worked, but I hate re-showing work. I have this real issue of especially if it's in the same city. You know, I don't like to show the same piece of work in the same city a couple of times. So I was like, yeah, I'll make something new, and then I probably shouldn't have made something new, but you know, it worked okay in the end. Yeah, I was happy with the piece, and everybody's work, you know, really worked really well together in the end. So, yeah.
But it does sound like there's a common kind of thing of there being an anxiety about how we didn't give the direction. More, we said, all right, you're the ones we want to work with, and we think that you will work together well.
Yeah,
and we trust you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we trust. Yeah, we can make an exhibition with you, because from what you've done before, this actually feels like it's going to work. And it was just trusting that feeling that it would do that.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of it was, for me, it was like kind of going to everybody's websites and trying to see what all they had done before, and kind of imagine what sort of a thing I could put into this space. And yeah, I mean, I think it's worked really well, and it's kind of slightly changed my approach to what I do, because now I realize I don't have to be 100% in control of the lighting, the atmosphere and stuff like that. I can deal with like a sound bleeding into it and not have a freak out about, you know, it's affecting my work, you know. So yeah, I think that it has helped, and it will change how I approach doing things like that, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, even like, it can be a really rich way just to put people together like that, and you know, it's to put together intuitively, but things happen then that maybe you don't expect. Some things, when you're putting us together, you think this will work well for these reasons, but then I guess obviously there are then emergent things that come out that wouldn't be predictable, and I think that's interesting for the artist as well as just the show, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's always an element of risk, I think, with group shows as well, because you're never quite sure of, until everything's in the space, you can't really, you know, you can visualize things, but once you're in the space, things change always anyway. So I think that's the kind of nice aspect of the group shows then, that you kind of work collectively, collaboratively together to talk about, you know, the best way to present the work, or not to compromise it. You know, there's certain compromises obviously with lighting and sound and stuff like that, but yeah, I think it came together quite well.
Yeah, I think four new works might have been very high risk.
Yeah.
But I do think that
one's maybe the ideal, going with like the 3 existing.
Yeah.
but I think it's that thing as well, that we're able to use the space, the gallery space, as this kind of notional expanded studio and set it up for play. And we did have that time with the setup, even though we did stick pretty much to how we drew it out before we started. But we didn't know how it would look until we got the lights off from the house lights down and relied on the lights from the works themselves to how it was going to feel. But I think I suppose for me, I'd been able to go to everyone's studio, and Mary as well, whereas Stuart, maybe you did have to look at the websites. So I think we did have a sense of how it could feel and what it would feel like, having been in the studios with you. Yeah, and I think it is quite reflective of that common ground of the studios that you work in every day. Yeah, but I think that's one of the things the gallery's been able to do and enjoy, really, is this approach to the public space being an expanded studio space, something that's not settled or not fixed. Because even the shift in context from when the show opened pre the lockdown scenario to now, there's a shift in the reading, because I am still getting to go into the gallery to check on it for security purposes, and I'm on my own. But that kind of going in and out, it feels very different because the approach to the gallery is very different.
Yeah, but I guess just in terms of like it being investigating the notion of history, and like what in the future will we reflect back on this, and this exhibition being on at this time, and how that reflects this kind of current moment as well. And this is, I guess that was part of why we were selecting your work as well, that you were all kind of reflecting different ideologies. So I'm sure in the future, when we look back at this exhibition, it'll have a very different meaning or context, or we'd write about it or talk about it differently as well.
Yeah, I actually think that's really, the one thing that's coming through this, as a dominant, really, is how we'll reflect on this moment. Because that was kind of the approach to the exhibition from the start.
Yeah, even with the part of the title, the Unreliable Presence, I think that I'm still trying to get around that bit of the title, where it's like, as you said at the beginning, maybe Michael, was the idea of like apocalypse and unreliability or presence. So it's kind of like driving you around the exhibition, having that in mind, maybe gives you a different kind of approach to each work and to where it brings you as well. I really like that bit in the title. Yeah.
So Mary, I'm actually talking to the other Mary, who's hosting the conversation today. Mary, how are we doing for time?
I'd say we have another 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh.
Fantastic. And sorry, Mary, how did you find, because you were pulling everything together for us, really. So how did you find working with this exhibition, and how it came to be in the end?
I think for me, I suppose you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but that kind of element of trust that you, Peter, and Mary had in the artist, and knowing how the overall feel of it was going to come together. And I suppose in hearing what Stuart had to say about kind of being a little bit uneasy about like what was actually expected, there was always the confidence from Peter and Mary, and kind of knowing what the kind of overall feel and look of the exhibition was going to be, even though, maybe the particular works weren't decided on. And I think that just came up, it came from kind of knowing each artist and what they were kind of working on, and knowing that those themes would work together. The element of trust, really, I think, was what came across.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so
one of the things I was planning was to come in towards the end of the show a bit cold, and sort of watch everything slightly removed from the initial setup and stuff, and then see how I felt about it. So yeah, hopefully I had the chances to do that. Maybe I guess we'll be taking it down at some point. So
well, I think when the gallery is allowed, or it's possible to reopen again, I'd like to continue the exhibition on for a couple of weeks, to give time for those who haven't got to see it to come in and actually experience it for themselves, and for us to see it anew.
Yeah, I think it'd be, yeah,
That's great.
I'd like to mention though as well that there's fantastic documentation of the exhibition by Simon Mills. It's on our website, so people can kind of go and have a look, see what we're talking about.
Okay, excellent.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, so I think that's us. So thank you very much, everybody.
good sign. Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Great.
the exhibition will be open for a couple of weeks after we open. So we'll hopefully see you there, and maybe we should do another reception.
Yeah, another reopening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We probably definitely need a drink by then.
Absolutely. And